So I want to kind of summarize this concept of selectors in CSS, right? It's kind of at the heart of the way CSS works. We can select particular elements either by using their actual tag names, right, in our CSS like we did here. So if we do this, h2, and give it a property of text decoration with an underline value, right, then any h2 on this page is going to have an underline, as we can see here. This is an h2, that's an h2, that's an h2. And we've also seen how we can add classes and IDs, right? We can only have one ID in a page. So if I were to define this ID here called blue text, I can only use it once in this page. And we're using it here on this particular H2. So we use IDs when we know we have one kind of standout element that's going to get styled a certain way. We can use classes once or many more times on a page, as we did here. We've kind of added this underline class, and it shows up here, 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 and here. Right? So in the underline class, all we said is, okay, anything that has this class name called underline on it, which we've added in these 4 places, then we'll just give it this property. We don't even have to give it the underline property. We could be silly and say, okay, anything with that class name of underline has the color yellow. Right? And so then we can see the results there. But usually with your class names, you want to be fairly descriptive of what you're about to do to that particular element. So we've looked at that, but what I want to introduce you to is back on the w3schools.com webpage, right? This is a great reference website, and you can go down and find their selector reference. If you kind of look for it on the menus here, you'll see CSS selectors, right? And you'll see that there are quite a few different ways to utilize selectors. We've looked at how we could target a particular type of element, right? We just drop the actual element name. We've also looked at how we can use classes and IDs. But notice there are quite a few different things we could do. We can do this idea where we have a comma in between 2 elements. And what that's going to do is group the styles together. So for example, let's say I wanted to affect the paragraph tag, any element that's got a paragraph, tag around it, and as well as maybe the H6. So I want to do a style that kind of affects both of those at once, right? So here's our paragraph, and here's our H6. So let's say I want to center both of those. Well, I could go in there and add a class that does centering and then center the 2, but let's say I want to affect every single H2 and paragraph on the page, and let's say there's multiple ones, so I'll add a few more here. We'll get rid of this class for now. So there's another paragraph tag, and then we have our H6. So I could, if I wanted to center all of them, I could add a class here and maybe call it center. And then I could do the same here and add a class here called center. And then I could add another class here and have it called center as well. But that's getting really redundant, right? If we're doing that so many times and we're affecting every single paragraph tag and H6. So if we know we're going to affect all of these the same, we can group. So check this out. We could go into the style sheet and just say, okay, all the P tags, and then have this comma here and say, and all the H6 tags, okay? So we can do that with the class, the actual elements. We could also do it with things that have class names on them, something that's like, anything that has the class name center or whatever. So we can really group together, and so check it out. We could do text align center. Now if I save that, you'll see anything, all of the P6s and all the H6s are centered. And again, if I wanted to go further with that and say, let's also affect anything that has a class called center this, we can do that, and then we can take that class and apply it anywhere else. We could apply it to this, maybe this unordered list, and see what happens. Center this. So if I save that and I refresh, there we go, the unordered list gets centered as well. So that's really cool. We can do some more complex kind of, control with our CSS. We can have more complex control, right? So we can do this comma here. That one's really cool. This one you're going to see quite a bit too, where you want to kind of get all of the elements that are inside a particular element. And this is when you're doing a lot of nesting. And remember, we're going to do nesting quite a bit when we're building web applications. So let's illustrate that just really quick. We could do something like this and have a div that wraps this paragraph tag. And inside of it, we might have another div. And have a paragraph tag in there as well. And let's just kind of break that out into its own line so that it's nested properly. Remember, we always indent for any nested elements. Okay, so this paragraph is one level in from this div, right? And then this div happens to be one level in from this parent div, this is the closing tag, that's the opening one. And then this child div, right, has another paragraph tag inside of it. All right, so just kind of follow your eyes and you can start to see how it's nested in there. Well, we could select all of the paragraph tags that are inside this div and style them a certain way. So we could call this one, the parent div or whatever we want to call it. And then I could go back here and I could say, okay, going off of what they're saying here, if I just put a space between two selectors like this and I say parent div, so that's going to target this particular div right here because it has that class name. And then if I say all the paragraph tags inside of it, all I have to do that is just a space and then add the P. And then say, let's color all of those yellow. And now if I take a look at that and refresh, there we go. All the paragraph tags inside there got colored yellow. You're going to see that quite a bit where you have a space in between them. So that's really cool too. We can select elements that are nested by doing that. We can also select elements that are just directly nested, so the immediate child, by using something like this. We can do adjacent selectors, right? So if there's a paragraph on the same level as the div and they're right next to each other, then let's select both of those elements. Okay, so a lot of really complex and powerful things we could do with selectors, and I really urge you to check this out. You can also click on these and see the actual examples by clicking these try it yourself buttons. And this is, it's incredibly invaluable when you're learning this stuff. So I urge you to check it out. So here's how they do it. You can have a plus sign in between a div and a P, and it's going to affect the P that's adjacent to the div we're talking about. So you can kind of hack around with these and just experiment with them. And you'll see this was, for example, in this case, this is the P we're talking about that got the yellow background color, right? Because it is the only P that's adjacent to a div on this entire page. So you'll have to really look in there when you're new at this and kind of let it sink in, but you'll start to see the results, and being able to play with this is literally invaluable, right? So definitely take a look at that. And just as a last note, as you're looking at this, don't try to memorize all of it. Remember, use this more like a reference. You can always come back here and say, okay, maybe I want to select something in a more complex way as I express my page. I want to do something really interesting and select maybe just the header or just a particular image that's sitting inside of a nested div. That's where this is going to come in handy, and you're going to be able to find that 9 times out of 10 there is a way to do what you're trying to do just by looking at this page. So definitely check it out. And one last thing I want to show you with selectors is you can also chain them together. So chaining it happens with classes, right? So for example, if you have multiple classes on an element, you can chain them in your CSS by doing something like this. Red text dot underline. You see how there's no space. So you'll see that sometimes as well. And it's just yet another way to select. And what this is going to say is we're only going to select the elements that have both class names on them. So in this case, when you have the dot directly in between with no spaces, we're talking about only something like this. This has got both class names, the red text and the underline. It's not going to select this element. It's not going to select this element. It won't even select this element. Just things that have both. So there we go. We've looked at some of the most common ways to kind of select things. And then again, you'll want to use this website as a reference. But just remember, we can select actual elements, we can select classes, IDs, and we can select child elements if we want. And finally, we can chain them together or group them. So I know that's a lot to absorb, but again, I just want you to kind of get familiar with this. You don't have to try and absorb all of this right now if you're new to it. But looking at this and kind of playing around with it is just going to be really helpful going forward when you're trying to build production-grade applications.